Legend of the Phoenix, from the Ark to the Philippines. Since ancient times, Filipinos have understood that the world we live in was created by a divine being. It is to be noted that these people have and revere one God, the maker of all things, whom some call Bathala, others Malay-ari, others Diwata. The family of Austronesian-speaking peoples, like most ancient civilizations, saw it as a matter of fact that heaven and earth was created by God. This is why most cosmogenies, origin stories, of a people group do not start from creation, but from the flood that led to the dispersion of all living things over the face of the earth. Phoenician historian Sanchuniathon began his cosmogony with a boundless, dark, windy, watery chaos, which went on for a long time and produced a lot of watery mud, mot. Celestial orbs that had moved like clockwork were suddenly seen to behave capriciously and were named overseers of heaven, the sun, the moon, and the stars. Heat on the earth and sea created clouds and heavy rains falling down to rise up again in a continuous hydrological cycle. Sanchuniathon claimed that this same account was recorded in the Cosmogony of Thoth. Egyptian priest King Thoth's creation story, inscribed on the Shabaka stone, tells of how the god Ptah conceived ideas in his heart, considered them with his reason, and then spoke the words with his mouth. As the words dropped from his tongue, they turned into physical entities. Ancient Egyptian creation myth is strikingly similar to the Genesis record of God speaking the world into being. Clearly, both ancient Phoenicians and Egyptians did not consider the story of watery chaos as the first beginning, but that of the second beginning of mankind. Patriarch of the family who survived the flood was called Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and Atrahasis in the Atrahasis epic. Ancient Vedic texts refer to him as Manu, Xisuthros to the Babylonians. The Phoenicians named him Uranus, heaven, also Uranus to the Greeks, and Noah to the Hebrews. Historians of antiquity who included the story of the deluge with details on the ark which bore humanity's sole survivors in their records included Nicholas of Damascus in his 96th book, the Egyptian Hieronymus in the Phoenician Antiquities, Berosus the Chaldean, and the grand historian of China, Sima Qian. Josephus was even bold enough to name the mountain as the place of descent known to the Armenians and claimed that the curious could still go there to see the remains of the ark. First-century historian Josephus noted that the ark rested on top of a certain mountain in Armenia, which when Noah understood, he opened it. When the water was decreased to a greater degree, he sent out a raven, as desirous to learn whether he might go out of the ark with safety. But the raven, finding the land still overflowed, returned to Noah again, and after 7 days he sent out a dove, which came back to him covered with mud and bringing an olive branch. Noah's use of birds as his initial scouts were echoed in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Utnapishtim had sent out a dove, a swallow, and a raven. Babylonian historian Berosus tells us that Xisuthros released birds that returned to the ship with muddy claws, but knew that land had appeared when the next birds he released failed to return. The use of birds would have been an unforgettable highlight of the deluge narrative to the Austronesian peoples who had chosen the bird as their primary totem. Myths from Austronesian Oceania tell of Tangaroa, god of the oceans, progenitor of life, and guardian of boats. It was he who sent out the bird named Tuli over the waters, only to return with a report that there was no land. So Tangaroa threw down stones to make the islands. Tangaroa is one of the oldest Polynesian gods, known as Tagaloa Lagi in Samoa, Takaroa in Hawaii, Tanaoa in Marquesas, Taaroa in Tahiti, and Tangaroa in Rarotonga. Origins of the New Age of Man in myth from the Philippines were preserved in the Boxer Codex. They say that before there was land, there was only the sky and the sea. And there was a bird that used to fly always between the sky and the sea without finding a place to rest. The bird decided to make the sky and sea fight in order to make a land for it to alight. Flying up to the sky and down to the sea, the bird caused conflict between the sky and the sea. The sky began to throw rocks down at the sea, and the sea began to rise as if it would overwhelm the heavens. After things had settled down, the bird saw the emerging earth as the sea subsided. It flew down very happily, having found a place to rest from its continuous flight. And while resting on the land, it saw a piece of bamboo floating on the waters. This had 2 nodes and was being carried by the undercurrent to the shore where the bird was perched. The bird began to peck vigorously at the bamboo until its nodes split open, and later a man appeared from one of the nodes and a woman from the other. They became the first man and woman in the world. Parallels to the flood story include the rising of the waters, the absence of any land for the bird to light on, the bird finding the first land to appear after the water had subsided, and the role of the bird in bringing the first men of the new age out of the vessel. The man, lalaki, told the woman, babae, that the world would be populated by their children, but she was hesitant to marry him because she was his sister. The first man and the first woman of this Philippine origin myth recognized that they were siblings, children of the same parents. If they had parents, then they were obviously not the first created humans, but the first of this new age of flood survivors. Phoenician historians wrote that Uranus, heaven, and his sister wife Ge, earth, were counted as the first men after the deluge. Sima Qian, Grand Historian of China, started the historical narrative with Fu Si, heavenly sovereign, and his sister wife Ni Hua, earthly sovereign, who were seen as the parents of mankind after they had survived a great flood. Like the first humans, lalaki and babae, the Phoenician and Chinese survivors had parents. Philippine mythology describes the vessel that carried the flood survivors as a bamboo or coconut. China's histories simply tells us that Fu Si's element was wood. The biblical Genesis account tells us that the ark was made of gopher wood and gives specific measurements on its dimensions. Scientists who study the given proportions have found that it exceeds modern ships in stability. The wooden vessel was not streamlined for speed, but for extreme stability and buoyancy. Perhaps the best local comparison for the Austronesian storytellers was the bamboo or coconut that was not built for speed, but could float across the vast waters with its contents intact. Filipino children are familiar with the origin myth taught as part of school curriculum, recorded by Legazpi in 1567, who identified a bird that could find no rest between water and sky as a hawk. The bird who played a crucial role in the recreation and repopulation of the earth after the deluge has been called tigmamanukan, sari manok, and was so important to the Austronesian Filipinos that chronicler Antonio de Morga thought that Tagalogs saw the bird as their ultimate deity. The anonymous author of the Boxer Codex also nearly made this mistake, but was advised by the Tagalogs not to equate the two, because the tigmamanukan was not the creator god, but only his messenger. The story of the Great Flood would naturally resonate within the psyche of the maritime Austronesians, who traveled to the islands and coastlands of the world, carrying along with them all the necessities of life, in order to fulfill the mandate of colonization and repopulation. With the patriarch of the flood survivors as their divinely inspired model, the family of Austronesian-speaking communities crossed oceans to establish a broad geographic dispersion that was unmatched by any other people group of that age. On their ships, Austronesians carried along with their families, male and female of their domesticated animals, and the seeds for cultivation. Each journey mimicked the watery voyage of those who had emerged from the Ark to establish their community with culture intact. Austronesian-speaking peoples are recognized as the first humans to develop intercontinental vessels and sailing technologies capable of crossing oceans. Beginning from the 3rd millennium BC, our ancestors crossed oceans and spread out to Madagascar in Africa, Southeast Asia, Taiwan, Oceania, New Zealand, and possibly even the Americas. To learn more about our amazing ancestors, download the Austronesian series of books for free at bit.ly/jgcbooks.